Safe and affordable funding for equity and resilience. We're now going to call that SAFER, so it'll be a little easier than that mouthful. Advisory group meeting. This is our first advisory group meeting. We're still waiting for a few of our advisory group members to come in here, but I just wanted to let you know a few things. We are webcasting this meeting, so if you have a comment or a question when we get to that point, we do need you to use a microphone to so that we can make sure the folks that are listening in remotely can hear what you're saying. So if you could just be patient as we get a microphone to you. We do have some stationary microphones, and then we have some to pass around, and that is going to be the same for the advisory group members, and there are quite a few of us, so hopefully we can pass quickly when we need to share the microphone. And then in terms of just quick emergency procedures, if there is an emergency, please exit the way that you came in and calmly and carefully leave. But that's about it in terms of that. And to get things rolling, I'm going to pass it over to the State Water Board Chair, Joaquin Esquivel, to do a little welcome for us.
Thank you, Jessica. Did you want to wait for the last members to arrive? Okay, well, great. Well, good morning, everyone. First and foremost, I think today's attendance here in person and also on the webcast speaks to, one, the real interest, but I think the opportunity that we have to synthesize so much of the leadership and expertise that has gone into the passage of the Safe and Affordable Fund. And if we're going to be successful, we'll need to leverage that as well in the implementation of the program. This advisory committee was a real key part of setting up the program for us. We knew that we were going to need to be able to check in often, particularly as we first set up this program, given its very unique nature, and be able to self-assess and understand, and again, leverage, I think, so much of the leadership in this state that has really provided us this opportunity to begin with. And so I just wanted to thank and just kind of open things with just a tone of gratitude, but also want to make sure that we're clear on this advisory board's role and its intentions and its needs. I think we need to have a common vision if we're going to utilize this body to its most effectiveness. I also want to note, though, that this advisory group and body isn't the only way that the board will continue to solicit feedback, provide opportunity for the public and others to engage as we develop the Safe and Affordable Fund and the SAFER program. With that, I think that's really all I wanted to do. Just thank you. You know, I said this is a unique program, and I think we're pretty fortunate to be at the board at a unique time, with the Division of Drinking Water having only been brought over to the board in about the last 5 years. I think we have a tremendous amount of lessons to dig up from. Certainly the relationship with the legislature as well, and the leadership there has allowed us to garner additional authorities such as mandatory consolidation, allow us to set up the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions, which Joe is now the new official head, and want to thank him and also all the staff today. Jessica Bean and Andrew Alvoget as well have been instrumental in really being able to pull together today's discussion. But it is, again, a unique moment here at the board and the state of California itself. We haven't ever had a fund that has allowed us to pay for operation and maintenance of failing or soon to fail systems. And I think it's going to behoove us all to, particularly in this first year, to be flexible, to continue to understand that, particularly in this first year of implementation, this board and this body, that is, this group, its role and its frequency of meeting and its tone will sort of change as we begin to implement and as we begin to see where dollars are flowing and how we're going to best make use of what is, again, a very unique opportunity we have in this state. So just again, thank you all for joining us today and for your continued engagement, and just really look forward to the discussion. And I want to pass it over to my fellow board member, Laurel Firestone, for some thoughts as well.
Thank you so much. Is it okay if I stand? I want to see people. So this is a huge mission that we have, and that we've been privileged to be able to start to more aggressively take on as a state. Many of the people here have been working on ensuring access to safe drinking water and affordable drinking water in their own communities or in neighboring communities for many, many years, and many fought very hard to get the kind of resources and tools that we have today. And this is really the kickoff to be able to say, we are now throwing everything we have at this at the state level. We need all of you at the local and regional and state levels to help us figure out how we make sure that this is successful and lives up to not only the promise, but the call to action that many of you have brought to the state, and that we, that brings us all here today. So I am so grateful for all the time that you all have already put in on this challenge and the time that we're asking moving ahead. And this is a long day. There will be many more long days as we try to make sure that we're hearing from the advice and experience that you all have to make sure this is successful. So thanks.
Thank you. All right, again, I failed to introduce myself, Jessica Bean, when I first got started. I'm with the State Water Board's Office of Public Participation, so I'll be facilitating the meeting today. And I also have a staff of other public participation specialists here today to help us. We're going to be doing some flip chart notes for you. Also, we'll be taking meeting notes, and I'll get into some of that in a little bit more detail. But what I would like to do is do an introduction for the group. And to start that, and let's see if we can, there we go, make things a little bit unique. Rather than doing a traditional introduction, if you could make a friend, pick a neighbor, somebody sitting next to you, and here, and then you're going to have 5 minutes to learn a little bit about them. These are just some suggested questions that you could ask them. But here at the table, if you could find a partner at the table, so another advisory group member or even a staff person. Folks in the audience, we won't have time to go around the room and introduce you, but I do encourage you to also turn to a neighbor, find out some things about them. I'm very curious to find out what people's flavor of ice cream might be. So if you could do that, we're going to take about 5 minutes. And then what we'll do is we'll go around the table and we're going to do really quick introductions. We're going to do a 30-second introduction of your neighbor. So you're not introducing yourself, you're going to introduce your neighbor for us. So you really got to get to know them, all right? So you have 5 minutes starting now, and I'll let you know when we're done. All right, folks, time's up. All right, so we're going to go around the table, and Michael, would you start for us introducing your neighbor? Oh, can someone pass that microphone over there? I believe it's you have to turn it on. It's on right now. It's the button that says mute. If you just press and hold it for a second, it should turn green. I went through that just a second ago.
Okay, it's working. Okay, I was gonna introduce David, who's sitting next to me. For ice cream, he went with Rocky Road, but he didn't have a reason. For type of food, it was rice, and just because that's a versatile food, kind of cuts across cultures. Risotto was mentioned. For vacation, it was fishing, I think, right? And hasn't been to a lot of concerts. And my name is Michael Claiborne.
I'm sorry, could you tell us what organization and what category for the advisory group too?
Yeah, Leadership Council, I think it was the NGO.
Okay. That's for Michael,
That's
right?
Michael,
but okay.
yeah. I'm the Central Valley Salinity Coalition public member, but he often gets confused as to who he represents.
All right, so David, did you want to tell us about Michael?
Well, actually, we had a three-way group meeting,
Okay.
so I'm going to be talking about Sergio.
Okay.
So we don't follow directions well, clearly, over here.
That's quite all right.
Sergio's the ice cream he would be and why was pistachio ice cream, and I think it brings him back to his roots and his mother. I think when he first went to get ice cream, is I getting this right? That she introduced him to pistachio ice cream, so that reminds him of his family. He appreciates Italian food, and also has for vacations likes to spend time in nature to decompress. Also, we talked about what he does on a normal day, and that's really spending time with family. So I think family is a strong component of who Sergio is. Did I get it close? Okay.
Thank you. Yep, go ahead.
And of course, Michael here. He likes chocolate.
Can you speak?
Chocolate. He appreciates that. He didn't give a specific why, but when it comes to food, he liked mole. Did you mention like mole poblano or any specific?
I didn't.
Yeah. Okay.
I was pretty generous
about it. just out of curiosity. He loves to do backpacking, so it's something that definitely he enjoy. I can imagine with him with his kid. And the first concert, I think you said Red Chili.
Yeah, Red
Hot Chili Peppers. Yeah, and Boys. So that was his first concert. So we got a lot of really energetic people here.
Thanks. If you want to go to Jesse.
All right. Good morning, everybody. This is Katie Porter from the California Association of Urban Water Agencies, or CUA, or I think I've mixed up the letters, but California Urban Water Agencies. There we go, CUA. Katie's been working with CUA for the last 3 years, but she's done a number of other things, including working for US EPA. We skipped the ice cream, et cetera. We went straight to vacations. So, and interestingly, Katie's favorite thing to do on vacation is to sit quietly and get to know a neighborhood by chilling out in a local coffee shop or a local neighborhood to just really get the feel of the place. And I definitely can appreciate that.
Thank you, Jessie. So this is Jessie Snider with Self-Help Enterprises. And Jessie's been with Self-Help for about 12 years in the Visalia office. And on vacation, she likes to scuba or really do anything outdoors, like hiking and also enjoying new foods and drinks. and you're representing NGOs, and I'm representing public water systems.
Good morning. I'd like to introduce my new friend Dawn James here. We both represent public water systems, so we had that in common. Dawn represents the he coached me, but Tolowa Dene Nation. I'm going to get it better and better each time. So he likes Rocky Road ice cream. He is a certified treatment operator, as well as he runs a water system as well as a wastewater system. He's the general manager, and he stays very busy with 4 young children at home.
Hello, this is Dawn White. As she said, she runs a public water system also. Pretty big organization that runs around and does troubleshooting and brings water systems into line, which I find pretty fun. She has family that's over in Arizona, kids with grandkids. She also likes Rocky Road. Her organization is Golden State, and that's what I got.
Good morning, everyone. This is Benjamin Cuevas. He represents the residents of Tullyville and has lived in the Tulare area for a couple of years now, but came by way of Virginia. But he's lived here before, he wants to specify. He left for in between because he has 2 daughters who served, and so he moved to live closer to them, and then they came back and he came back. He would be strawberry ice cream, which made me very excited. Love strawberries. And he had maybe the best answer to favorite food that I've ever heard. So I asked him what his favorite food was, and he said anything his wife cooks. And I was like, this is a wise man. He's had a long and happy marriage, I can tell. But particularly her barbacoa.
Well, my new friend's name is Camille. I didn't really get much into asking her questions. Someone called me from a leadership program while I was trying to get it. The only thing I got was her favorite ice cream was mint chocolate chip. Sorry.
I got to interview Maria Oliveira, who's on the board of the Tullyville Mutual Water Company and is representing public water systems and also a resident of Tullyville. And favorite ice cream is coconut pineapple. In addition to the questions, one of the things I learned was just how much that basically once she had grandkids, she went to go work at night so that she could take care of her grandkids. And, as been a resident of Tullyville since the 70s, but just recently in the past year has moved on to the board.
All right.
Good morning, everyone. This is Isabelle Salario. And actually, we met a couple of months ago in Lanier. She fits the resident category. And so her favorite ice cream is strawberry because she likes the fruit. Favorite food is Chinese because of both the sweetness and spiciness, right? But how close is the nearest? Oh, and the veggies too, right? How close is the nearest Chinese food place? 25 minutes, so she's dedicated. Yes. So her favorite thing to do on vacation is visiting friends and family when she's in Mexico. And first concert was Vicente Fernandez, right? All right. Wow, got it right.
Hi. I want to try to speak in English because my first language is in Spanish, but I want to try to do the best I can. This is my friend Joy Karskowski. His favorite ice cream is coffee. His like the Mexican food. And when he go to vacation, he wanted to relax. The favorite music is Lover Boy.
Not my favorite, first concert.
I'm sorry, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. So I wanted to introduce Everett Mcgee. Everett is from Fuller Acres. He has a long history there. Grew up there, and his grandparents were involved in founding the Fuller Acres Water Company and getting water out there in the 20s. So it's been a long history with working with water out there. In his spare time, he officiates youth sports, so football, baseball, basketball, softball, volleyball, right? And so he keeps pretty busy with that. And his favorite ice cream would be strawberry.
This right here to my left here is Andrew Aldervoigt. Got it. Good. He's Assistant Deputy Director for the Safer Drinking Water, whatever that means. Okay, his favorite ice cream is vegan cookies and cream. He can't have dairy apparently. I don't know how they would make that, but you say they do. They do. Favorite food is sushi. So I asked him if he liked to go fishing a lot. Adventure, he likes hiking and backpacking on his vacations, what he likes to do. And his first concert was Who? I guess The Who, I guess.
Hi, good morning. My new friend here is Elena Saldivar. She's from Pixley, California. She's representing Pixley as a resident. It's in Tulare County. She grew up about 5 miles away from there. I think it was called Early Mart. And she's been back and forth in that area in Pixley most of her life, I think. She likes to hike as part of her vacation. She likes the outdoors. She likes hiking a lot. I asked her what her favorite place in California was to do these things, and she says it was Sonoma County. It seems like there's a lot of outdoor things to do there, so she likes Sonoma County. She doesn't like the city very much because she grew up in the rural area of Pixley and around that area, which had a lot of migrant farm workers and a lot of dairies. Most of her life, she was an institutional assistant, instructional assistant, and she worked with schools a lot. And her favorite food, it's salads. I guess all types of salads is what she likes to eat. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to introduce my friend here, Casulo Estrada. He comes from the Coachella Valley Water District, and he grew up there in Riverside County. His favorite vacation, because we went just straight to vacations. I'm not an ice cream person, and so he likes to go visit historical sites and anything outdoors. And he studied civil engineering in Cal Poly and then returned home to use it there. And his favorite food is Mexican food, of which he specifies especially costillas de puerco and chile con nopales. And if you have never tried nopales, you should try them. They're very good. And I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to meet Casulo and everybody here. Thank you.
Good morning. My new friend Nick is from Mojave Water Agency. He's a local agency member. His favorite ice cream is chocolate because no other flavors exist. His favorite food is wings, and he enjoys going camping in the Mountain Lakes region of Southern California. And his first band he ever went to see was David Crowder Band. And we discussed his logistics to get here from Mojave, and he came in this morning, and we decided it was easier for him to get here than probably get to LA. So
It took me 4 hours of travel time to get here too. So, okay, my new friend is Emily Rooney. She is with the Agricultural Council of California, which is an NGO organization. She has to stockpile her ice cream because she likes peppermint ice cream. Her favorite food is paella, and her vacation spot is something she hasn't ever been to before. And then her first concert is at 13 years old. She got to see Paula Abdul, so that's another good one.
Good morning. I would like to introduce my new friend Horacio. He's from Salinas. His favorite ice cream is butter pecan. His favorite food is Mexican food. And he likes to travel and vacation. And what was the last one? First concert, the babies, yes. Thank you so much.
My new friend is Lucy Hernandez. She's from the Water Coalition. She likes butter pecan. She likes to travel, especially to Mexico. And what was the other? Mexican food. And she attend the Concert of los Bookies. She's involved in Goshen, nearby Celia, and she's been working with the Agua Coalition, and she's been working more than a decade, and she wants to make some changes for the communities that need water, because there's a lot of communities that don't have clean water for a long time.
All right, thank you. That was great. So, going the wrong way. There we go. So I apologize. This is a little small on some of the screens, but the advisory members have an agenda that's a little bit more specific than the one that was in the notice. There are some of these printed out in the check-in area. So when we get to our first break, if folks in the audience want to go out there and grab those, you can. But just to kind of walk you through what our plan is for the day, after we get through a bit of the this welcome and introduction piece, we're going to have an overview of the Safer Drinking Water Program, a framing, so that we can basically be all on the same page. And that's going to be an opportunity for the advisory group members to ask your questions, kind of the general overview questions. And then following that, we're going to have a short break, and we will have a photographer here, so we're hoping we can do a group photo at that time and maybe some individual headshots if we can. After that, we're going to have a discussion on the needs assessment. There's also going to be time at the end of that discussion for public comment. So for members of the public who are interested in commenting on a specific item, we do have comment cards for you just to help us keep things organized. Over here, Jenna-Lynn, if you want to stand up. Jenna-Lynn has the comment cards. You can get one from her, but we will have a specific time to discuss the needs assessment there. After that, we are going to have a discussion on the fund expenditure policy. We're going to have a quick break to grab lunch, but it is going to be a working lunch, so we'll come back and continue on. And in addition to discussing the draft policy, we'll be able to answer your funding related questions at that point too. So we may not have time during that initial program overview. You may have some additional funding specific questions. We're going to hold them over till that time, because that's really, we're spending the most time on that, because that's the most important issue that we have on the agenda today, because there's some timelines associated with getting that, your feedback and getting that adopted. And then we will have another public comment period at that time, specifically on the fund expenditure policy discussion. And then finally, we're going to go through a next step section. We'll talk a little bit about topics for future meetings and have a final public comment period in case we didn't get to all of the comments previously, or if there are comments on other items that were outside of the previous ones. Just to let you know, we are going to, we have a couple of folks taking notes here for us. We're going to have a parking lot because there's a lot of questions that we could get into. As you can see, we have a pretty tight agenda today. So if we have topics that come up that aren't directly related to the agenda item that we're working on, we are going to make a note of that so that we can either get back to it later, maybe something we can follow up with after the meeting, or it may be something for future meetings. So please keep that in mind that if it is something that isn't directly related, we may have to put it in that sheet for now, but we will get back to it at some point. Let's see. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to let you know, if you'll take a look at the top of this slide, it says Slido code SAFER. So if to help those people who are on the webcast and also our audience members, if you have some questions that are coming up, we are going to be using an online platform. If you go to Slido, SLIDO.com, and you enter in that safer code, that's going to take you to our question app. And that will allow you to either type questions in with you can use your phone or your laptop or a tablet. You can ask questions, you can make comments, but one of the nice features is you can also see the other questions and comments that are being made so that you can upvote them. So if there's a question that you think is really important, you can like that. It'll put it to the top of the list, and we're going to be moderating those comments so that and those questions so we can see what needs to be addressed, and maybe we can do that without having to take the time to just go through having people come up and ask the questions. So please feel free to use that if you are on the webcast or in our audience today. Oops, still clicking the wrong button here. Okay, so are there any questions on kind of the procedural issues so far, advisory group members? No? Okay, so I'm just going to run through a few things, an overview of the advisory group in general, and then we'll have a little bit of, again, time for some questions. If you have questions while I'm giving the presentation, please do so. It can be helpful if there are a lot of questions that you take your table tent and just flip it on its side for us, like that. That way I can see if you have it there and you don't have to hold your hand up the whole time. Thank you. Okay, so just a quick overview. What is the Safer Drinking Water Advisory Group? It's a consultative body. The purpose is to advise the State Water Resources Control Board on the fund expenditure plan and any other key analyses and policies that are as needed. It is composed currently of 19 representatives and from 6 different categories, and it's going to be governed by a charter. So if you take a look, you should have received a copy of the charter today when you came in to look at. Thank you. I feel like you're my Vanna over here. It's great. So basically, the charter just outlines the guidelines for the advisory group. We're not going to go through the charter line by line today. It's 4 pages, I think. 3 pages. But primarily, it talks about the purpose and the background of the group. We go through some specific member responsibilities, things like terms, compensation, travel reimbursements, those types of things. Some of this information has been in the emails and the discussions that we've had before the meeting. There's also going to be meeting procedures and protocol in there. Again, since we're not going to go line by line, a lot of what I'm going to cover in this intro is going to cover much of the information that's in there, but I encourage you to review that, and if you have any questions, you can bring it back and talk about it here, or we can do that separately as well. So kind of just in general, the question is, what is this group going to do? So what does the group do? The group is going to meet up to 4 times per year in locations around the state. And we're asking that you provide constructive advice and feedback on the fund expenditure plan and the other key analyses and policies as determined by the State Water Board. And as you can see, there are quite a few things that we have on the agenda for your feedback today. What doesn't the advisory group do? The advisory group is not going to be approving any plans or documents or making policy decisions. There won't be an evaluation of individual applications for funding. And you won't be developing consensus recommendations or majority opinions. So essentially, you're going to be able to provide your feedback, but you don't have to have consensus. You're not going to be voting on it. We're going to be listening to everybody's comments and feedback. How is the group advice going to be provided to the board? This is a question that we've discussed. Some of you, a lot of questions came up on this. We are going to be keeping meeting minutes. We're going to gather and review the group input as well as public comments, and we're going to make sure that we're documenting areas of disagreement and agreement, things of that nature. And we're going to be providing minutes to you, to each of you. We're also going to provide them to the board, and we'll be posting them online so that everybody can review those. I believe it says in the charter that we will generally try and do that within 3 weeks of the meeting to get it posted online. What are the member responsibilities? So these are just a few of the key ones, but we're asking that you attend all meetings, that you are prepared for each meeting, and we hope to get the information out to you sooner. This was a very tight timeline, and so we would like to be able to get you items for review sooner than we did on this one normally. If you can't make it, we ask that you contact the board staff. At this point, you can contact me and let us know, because there are no alternates. So if you're not here, then your seat is open. If you, we ask that you ask questions, so make sure you understand what's being asked of you or any of the documents that are out there. We want to make sure that you completely understand those things. And we really ask that you share your advice. There's a reason why we have you here, and we want to make sure that you feel comfortable sharing your opinions and being heard here. So please do that. And then finally, if you're not able to fully participate in the activities, if you find that it's too much, we just ask that you resign so that we can fill that seat with someone else. And you just need to let us know if for some reason it's too much. Okay? Any questions so far? Yes.
Sorry. Do we know the I'm too short. Do we know the dates for the remaining meetings for the year?
Sorry, not yet. We have an idea of when they will be. We are going to be having one in mid-February and mid-April, but we don't have the specific dates yet. I believe we're going to be talking about that later on in the meeting, because we do want to get, confirm with the advisory group members in terms of dates and times and locations. Oh, I'm still going wrong. There we go. Okay, so there were some questions about the legal considerations, and I'm going to try my best to point those out, but I do have one of our lawyers here to help out if there are any questions. But the main things that you need to know is that we are subject to the Open Meeting Act. So all of our meetings are open to the public. We have to publicly notice the meetings at least 10 days in advance. And it's important to note that as a group, advisory group members cannot meet outside of the publicly noticed meetings to discuss group business. So you need to discuss group business at these advisory group meetings if you're going to be doing that. Just to let you know, a quorum is 10 members, so absent a quorum, we can't conduct business. This is a pretty big group, so I would imagine we will be able to do that at these meetings. And then in terms of ethics and conflict of interest, we must comply with applicable ethics and conflict laws, and that includes AB 1013. And if you look on the screen here, it explains that basically just says that a member can't evaluate an application for a group that had an application, or excuse me, if they worked for the group submitting the application within 2 years, or worked with them, not just being paid, but if they were a representative of the organization. That shouldn't be a problem in here, because we're not going to be evaluating plans, but we just want to make sure that that's very clear and transparent. Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to touch on are the ground rules for today. So if you wouldn't mind, I'm just going to go through the 8 that are listed here. Some of these are listed in various places. Oh, I'm sorry, Michael, you had a question?
Yeah, just on the Bagley-Keene issues, I know those can be pretty complicated. I've spent some time with the Bagley-Keene guides and things like that, but I'm not sure everybody on the group has. Wondering if there's a planned training or explainer about the details around that. I know there are a lot more rules than just don't meet outside of group meetings, like soliciting input from the public and zero meetings and all those things.
Yeah. Julia, I'm looking to you. Yeah, if we don't have a planned training right now, but if people are interested in that, we can do that. We can also send out some links and materials to the group if you want to look into that further.
I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Yes, Sergio.
Do we have a copy of those anywhere?
Yes, they're in the charter.
In the charter?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
They are, I believe there's a procedural rules section. The meeting under meeting protocol, meeting guidelines.
Okay.
They're in there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so if we go through essentially, what are the ground rules? We're asking that you honor the agenda and support meeting start and end times. Listen actively and do not interrupt if possible. I think it'll be easier with this because you have to have a microphone to talk. Speak briefly and allow everyone to participate. Respect each other and disagree without being disagreeable. That's one of my favorites. Do your best to follow the ground rules, allow board staff to enforce the ground rules, and act in good faith in all aspects of group deliberations. And then the final one is conduct yourself in a manner that promotes joint problem solving, collaboration, and consideration of the input and viewpoints of others. So essentially, we want this to be an opportunity to have a dialogue so that we can learn from one another. You are all experts in your various communities and your organizations, and you have a lot to offer. And we just want to make sure that while sometimes interests may not be the same, we have a lot in common and we want to come to a common place. So if we could just give that opportunity for folks. And I will pass things on with that. If there aren't any other questions, no, to Andrew.
Thank you, Jessica. So I'm just going to give a very brief run through and background on SB 200 and kind of why we're all here today. I know most of the group members certainly, most of the members of the public and the audience have seen a lot of this. So I'm just going to go through quickly, but just to try to get us all on, on the same basis for SB 200 and what's going on with that. Bottom one, there we go. Go down. So just go through what the SAFER program is, and then that's the first part of the presentation. The second part will actually be what Joe will be giving later in the afternoon on the fund expenditure policy. So as I think everybody here is aware, we have in the state of California, we have a lot of issues with especially many of our small community water systems. We have about 3,000 community water systems and school systems. I know many of you have seen this map before, but the red stars on the map represent the systems that have drinking water violations, which currently is about 300 or so systems. And so that's really where our starting point for the program. But we know there's many, many other systems, again, especially small systems that have a lot of other issues, even if they're not having violations. And that's what the program wants to address, is the long-term sustainability of getting safe drinking water that people can afford. And again, the bottom statistic there is 90% of the violations that we see occur in the systems with fewer than 500 connections. So that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about. In terms of the funding, so this chart breaks down the funding in a couple different ways, but there are approximately $410 million in this fiscal year that are going to projects in disadvantaged communities. Much of that goes to capital projects, so building the infrastructure, building the facilities. And then the remaining 15% is going to be used for the appointing administrators. And again, we'll get into a lot of these details as we go along. Other technical assistance, interim replacement water, emergency assistance, and that's a lot of what we're able to do with the funding from SB 200. Are those sort of four categories there, as well as we get further into it, we'll be getting more into spending money on operations and maintenance and other funding gaps. And so there's a bunch of different funding sources that can be used for capital projects, but really through the SB 200 money, we have money and funding that can be used for things that aren't capital projects. And then briefly, just SB 200, again, it goes through, it talks about the projects that are eligible to be funded through the Safe Affordable Drinking Water Fund. It requires the board to adopt an expenditure plan. And so the first step of that you'll be hearing about today, which is actually developing the policy that the board will adopt for the plan. So there's a two-step process, but that is one of the requirements, and that's one of the reasons in SB 200 that this group is here, is to give us advice on that. It requires that we have this advisory group. It's specifically for to give us advice on the expenditure plan, but of course there are a lot of other things that we'll be bringing to the group as we go, and we'll talk about some of those today and some of those at future meetings. The needs assessment work, which is going to be sort of foundational for how we address all of the systems that have issues with sustainability. We'll also be talking about other data issues. We'll be talking about what we'll be doing with the administrator handbook in the future, and things like that. So there are a number of different things that we'll be bringing to this group in addition to the expenditure plan, and then other issues as they come up and other things that are of interest to the group, certainly. SB 200 also requires us to publish maps of high-risk aquifers. And so again, we'll touch on that just a little bit today, but that's something that we'll be getting into more detail with presentations for the group in the future. It also requires that there's sort of more interaction with local health departments and reporting of data. And then there's also new authorities in terms of determining public water system sustainability in the permitting process, so our ability to accept or deny permits based on whether we think a system is sustainable, and that's especially for new systems. And then this is just the last thing that I wanted to talk about briefly in terms of the goals of the program. The first is identifying high-risk systems and areas that are at high risk. And so, again, we're initially talking about the systems that are on the human right to water list. Those are the ones that have violations of MCLs, maximum contaminant levels. But really what we want to do with the program is look at all systems that have different risks of failure and bringing those into sustainability in some way and using different tools. So, and then the first of those tools are consolidations and regional solutions. So combining water systems, either physically combining them or combining the management of the water systems in some way, or else regionalizing, doing things on a county by county basis, for example, things of that nature. We're also working both on the regulatory side and on the financial assistance side on accelerating our project timeline. So again, both on getting funding out as quickly as possible, as well as doing the permitting and the enforcement and things like that on a as timely basis as we can. Excuse me. We also are looking at comprehensive solutions, and this gets into some of what we'll talk about later with administrators, for example, where we want to be able to address not only sort of the infrastructure needs, but also management needs, also, you know, fiscal needs, you know, everything that a system will need to become sustainable. And then another important aspect is what we're calling local capacity building. And this is really about having expertise in communities so that community members can be more engaged, but that also that there are employment opportunities locally for people to run systems and manage systems. And so workforce development is something that we're kind of slowly getting started on, but is something that's going to be an important aspect of the program as well. And then lastly, you know, the overall goal of this program is long-term sustainability, but we also want to make sure that people have access to safe drinking water in the interim and, you know, while we're getting to those long-term solutions. So that was all. I just wanted to give that brief background on SB 200. If there are any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer them.
Question it would be in the identity, high risk, identifying high risk systems and areas.
Yes.
How are you guys identifying those areas to make sure that the funding goes to the most in need communities, and especially in our Central Valley?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the first step is, and we'll talk about that a little when we talk about the needs assessment a little bit later, but the first step is the mapping. And so that mapping is being done in a couple different ways, but our Division of Water Quality is doing some of that, and then some of the other contractors that you'll hear about are doing other pieces of that where they're looking at data from wells and then getting an idea of what the risks are overall in an area from different chemicals, whether it be nitrates or arsenic or TCP or a lot of different things. And then the idea is then we will start to be able to generate some sort of a risk score for different areas of the state, and that will then be used in some of our funding decisions in terms of what systems are at the highest risk, and that way we can direct the funding to the systems that are at the highest risk. So we don't know exactly how we're going to do that yet. That's part of this whole process. That's part of what we'll be asking everyone here for their advice on how best to do that. But that's definitely something that we know needs to be done.
Okay, and also another one real fast, and the local capacity buildings for the jobs that you guys will have opportunities for the communities. Are you guys planning to pay for their like for their to go to school for a training, or they would have to do it on their own?
Well, I think that's what we want to figure out, how to create those programs that will, for people who need assistance to get that training, financial assistance to do that. And so for example, we've been talking with, and again, we're just at the beginning of this, but we've been talking with the community colleges who do some of those training programs. We've been talking with the California Workforce Development Agency that has some money to pay for those types of training programs. And so we're looking at lots of different options, but yes, that would be part of the idea in that.
So two quick comments, questions. The first one is, I know that translation equipment in the back isn't working, so I just wanted to make sure that nobody's having issues with that. I know Isabel's having translation through Blanca, but if anybody else needs something in the interim. Yeah. And then just a kind of broad question about the Safer Drinking Water Program and how SB 200 fits in with existing programs. I would just like some more background on kind of that connection. I see the idea as connecting things like SRF and SB 200, but just wanted to ask that question.
Yeah. So, and that the one slide that I had that had that sort of bar graph with the different funding sources, that was sort of what that was meant to show, is that, we have, several, and Joe can get into the particulars of it, but, $1 million, several $100 million in funding that that is sort of the foundational money that that's there. And what this program is really doing, is, at least on the funding side, is building upon that. And so it's allowing, we're going to be still accessing the existing funds, the funds from SRF, from the different propositions and bond sources and things like that, but then also being able to build upon that. So that's on the funding side. On Joe, if you want to add anything.
We'll talk about it more.
Okay. Yeah. So, oh yeah.
Sorry, I wanted to add something. We, I think, recognize that this group was officially required in statute around the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund and SB 200, but the reality is that the program and the resources and tools that the state is bringing to the goals of this effort are far broader than just the funds in SB 200. And so we wanted to reflect that fact that we are not only pulling all the resources we have related to safe and affordable drinking water in terms of funding, but also the many tools we have, like the new administrator tool, consolidation tools, technical assistance. We have these workforce development strategies, and we have compliance and district engineer staff throughout the state. We have a lot of folks focused on consolidations in the local district offices. Office of Public Participation is really expanding to make sure that we can support community engagement in these processes. And then also, as Andrew noted, just a lot of data and assessment to have a much more proactive and comprehensive view of the needs. So the goal here with this renaming or branding as the SAFER program is really to recognize that this is more than just one fund or one piece of legislation, but really a much more comprehensive program that the state is prioritizing and bringing everything it has to bear.
Okay, David, you had a, oh no, I'm sorry, Horace.
I'm sorry, I'm just switching mics.
Hi, are we going to be dealing with the homeless on not having water and sanitation?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think we'll have to think about how that all fits in with that. I mean, that's certainly a big part of the human right to water, and and how we address the human right to water. Certainly, I think I'd also look to the group in terms of thinking about how that does fit into this. I think at this point, it's certainly a part of the human right to water. How it fits in with the SAFER program, I'm not sure, but I think that's something that we should talk about.
Also have a question on, in the past, most of the disadvantaged communities, they have water problems, but now there's a mixture of disadvantaged community, people that are disadvantaged and people that are not. How are they going to qualify to get drinking water, because they're all affected by the water contamination that is happening?
And I think that's something that I might ask Joe to talk a little bit about in terms of the funding criteria itself. But there are different ways that the Division of Financial Assistance evaluates the funding criteria, and different communities qualify for different pots of funding. So that's that's part of it. I think one of the things that the DFA, Division of Financial Assistance, does try to do is make that as seamless as possible, so everybody applies in a sort of through a similar mechanism, and then it's up to the division to help to figure out what funding they would qualify for. If that answers your question.
And last question, there's a big need for housing. There's housing where you have 11, 15 people. And once you have all that income of those 15 people, they don't no longer qualify for any grants. So do you have any ways of helping those people that they only get $18,000 a year on wages, but they have to get United in order to have a roof?
Right, and so I think again that's the question I might ask Joe to address, but it's based on the funding that goes out from Division of Financial Assistance is usually based on the community as a whole, and so however that community is defined, and I'm not sure how that works for large households and how that's accounted for, to be honest.
Ok, voy a hacer la pregunta en español. Me van a traducir porque quiero que realmente se entienda qué es lo que estoy preguntando. Mi pregunta es, ¿cómo van a ayudar a identificar a sistemas con contaminantes que no están regulados como el benzín y el cromo 6? Por ejemplo, benzín, nuestra comunidad salió, tiene arsénico, que bueno, ahorita se está controlado todo eso, pero se descubrió que salió el benzín. So, ¿cómo van a trabajar esos problemas cuando sale contaminantes que no están regulados? ¿Cómo vamos a trabajarlos?
Her question is, how will this board identify and help water systems or communities with unregulated contaminants? She said in Lanier, for example, they had arsenic in the past. Now that's under control, but now they have benzene in their water, or communities like Tuliville who have hexchrome, but it's not regulated.
So I think that's a complicated question. Part of it is, part of what we'll be doing with this program when we're looking at the at-risk systems is that will be part of it. So chemicals that are emerging or things like that will be part of what's involved in that at-risk evaluation. So that's going to be a piece of it. I think the other thing is, as we look at making systems more sustainable, whether it's through consolidations or regionalization, hopefully we'll be building systems that the drinking water systems that are kind of more robust, and that we can more easily address some of these things because they'll be larger because of the types of funding that will be available to them. But that is a complicated question.
So one of the items that's really prioritized in SAFER is operations and maintenance, and additionally kind of structural failures in the provision of TMF, technical, managerial, and financial capacity. And I guess I have two related questions. So the first is what the board's plan is to identify systems that lack TMF, in part because, for example, in the case of Sativa, they were meeting their TMF requirements in part because they had an accountant who was signing off on things when they didn't have financial sustainability. And then relatedly, how will the board be defining TMF? Because as far as I know, it's still not defined, and so it seems to be a bit of a moving target, and it would be really helpful to understand what the metrics are so that we can determine what systems truly are unsustainable, structurally unsustainable from both a management perspective and a physical plant perspective.
Okay, so in terms of how we'll be addressing it, I guess the first answer is that that is part of what will be looked at in the risk assessment and under the needs assessment, the risk analysis, and so technical, managerial, financial capacity is a part of that. I don't know the details of how the needs assessment is looking at that, but when we talk about the needs assessment later, we can talk about that a little bit. And then I'm sorry, what was your other question? I apologize.
The performance metrics.
Oh, performance
TMF.
metrics.
So, like, what's the definition of a system that's meeting TMF?
Yeah, and so I think that's something that we still need to develop, at least in a, I don't know, in a more holistic way. And so that's something that we can also talk about here, especially as we talk about the needs assessment. One of the things that that I want to mention with the needs assessment is, we'll be talking today and at future meetings about the current contract for the needs assessment and, and how that's going and what that's going to be working on. But, the needs assessment is something that, we have a whole new unit in Division of Drinking Water to do that. And so as that unit is built up, that'll be part of what they'll be doing is figuring those things out, as well as sort of what are the next steps in needs assessment and in risk analysis. The other thing is we do have some new authorities in SB 200 to request financial type information that we didn't have before, and so that's the other piece of it. And I think part of it is trying to figure out how we bring all these different pieces together, and that's something that we're still working on.
As we all conclude that one of the main reasons we are here is because many families, over 1 million Californians, don't have water, and many of these people have been extremely active in pushing for these projects, which is the case particularly in the Eastern Coachella Valley. I have been working in those areas for the last 20 years, and there is an incredible urgency of actually seeing results with a greater speed. I wonder if we can actually also discuss, and this is kind of like a question, something that also include strategies for project readiness. There are a lot of projects right now that are ready for consolidation, and we are talking about a fundamental discussion about how do we deploy the resources faster, so these families cannot be waiting any longer for those critical resources. That's pretty much the question I wanted.
Yeah, and so I think part of what Joe will talk about a little bit this afternoon is some of what we've just started on really bringing together discussions of the Division of Financial Assistance for us and the Division of Drinking Water to look system by system at what the issues are, and then to start to look at what the solutions are. And those are looking both at the same time on the regulatory side, so are you going to perhaps do a consolidation or have an administrator, as well as on the funding side, and bringing those together. And so that's part of the answer. I don't think that's the full answer, but part of it is we're just starting to kind of bring those discussions together internally in the water boards as to, for any individual system, what are the right sets of solutions that should go along with that, and also looking sort of regionally at it's not just that one system, it's what's around it as well. So that's part of what we're doing, just starting to do. And again, we welcome advice and on how best to do those things.
I have another question on private well owners. I know that in the Central Valley, we have a lot of private well owners that their wells went dry and they had to get a loan. And most of our private well owners are senior citizens that they depend on an income, fixed income, and they've been through difficult times. And I would like to know, do you guys have something in place like an emergency for them right now, so they don't have to wait through all the process? Because the emergency is now, some of them, they have loans that they have to pay, and some of them are still struggling to have safe, not even safe, I'm talking about water in their homes. Is there something that you guys have in place, like to have an emergency number where they could call and see if you guys could help them now, not so that they don't have to wait years for their application to be in process?
You know what? I'm gonna actually ask Joe to or
Am I allowed to bounce the question even further? Because our drought services manager is here in the room. But yeah, the short answer is in the Valley, Self-Help Enterprises is working with the board to develop a comprehensive response program to private well owners, which will cover outages, but also contamination. And it's in the early stages. Some of you saw its early roots during the big drought that we recently had with the deployment of interim hold water supplies, both put into tanks and also in bottles. And we're looking to kind of refine that, add point of use and point of entry treatment, and expand it to be valley-wide. But we only serve the 8 counties of the San Joaquin Valley. Tammy, is there anything you'd like to add? She's saying, and this is true, that we do currently have funding. I was talking about it as a future program, but some funding is already in place, and we do have some grants in addition to loans. So in the Valley, folks should be calling Self-Help Enterprises for assistance.
Okay, I had a question. Yes, we know that there's a great need, and though it seems like you have a lot of money to work with, it really isn't a lot of money when you think about the need. And I was wondering if one of the things that's going to be considered is going to be the effectiveness of the water systems that, because they've received funding, for example, where I come from Pixley, we are about to get a raise. Actually, we're going to start paying more, but we're going to be getting less water. And the community members do not, they're opposing it because they're going to do the same thing. They're going to dig some more wells. And as of this time, as many wells as they've dug, and it hasn't been a solution to the problem. Is that something that's going to be considered when they make the request for funding, their effectiveness that they've had? Is that why there will be administrators, or is that later on?
No, I mean that is something that we are starting to look at more and more. Is you know what's been done in the past and what's going to really be the long-term solution. You know we recognize that in a lot of places just drilling new wells is not going to be the long-term solution, and so we want to move away from funding those types of projects into figuring out what really is the long-term solution. And I don't, you know, for any particular system, it's going to be different, and it may involve drilling new wells. It may involve a lot of different things, but really, in terms of both our funding and our regulatory decisions, we want to start again through this program, but building on what has already been done, to be thinking more and more about, well, what makes sense over the long term, not what's going to work for, you know, the next 10 years, but what's going to work for 50 plus years and really allow a community to have a more reliable source of water. So, yes.
Because I did ask one of the board members, why are we going to dig more wells? Why not put in a filtration system? I understand that that's very costly, but at least if we had a filtration system where we could have water that we could drink, that would be good. That would be a lot better than just going ahead and spending the monies to open more wells. And there's a town close by called Poplar that has this filtration system like that, where the community members can go and get their water. And he said, well, that'll be the next stage, because they were already expecting funding from USDA, and I'm not sure who else. And I'm saying, I told him, well, what makes you think they're going to keep handing you money If it's not changing anything, you're saying that this will be the next step when they're supposed to get $4 million. Why not do something now or try to do something to alleviate the problem instead of waiting for the next time, which may not come?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we have a question on the web. What action can be taken to understand and list existing community water projects so as not reinvent the wheel to allocate and reallocate money to projects?
I think this is maybe a similar answer to the prior question, which is sort of prior couple questions, which is really we want to look kind of holistically at the solutions. So what works, for that community, what works regionally, and what's going to work over the long term, and that's really what we're trying to think about a little bit differently through this program. Is okay, how do we get to those long-term solutions? And again, it's sort of, although we're starting out with the systems with violations, really what we're talking about is what's the long-term solution, for everybody. I mean, that's what we want to get to in the end, is what's the long-term solution for everybody. And that doesn't mean there'll be no violations in the future. That doesn't mean that, but what it means is that it'll be easier to address those things, because hopefully we will be creating more sustainable long-term fixes to the problems.
Michael?
Yeah, sorry. Is there a question, another question?
Oh yeah, I had a question. So I guess this is kind of a follow-up to Sergio's point and now Elena's, which is we have kind of an opportunity here that we didn't have before to think longer term about getting solutions that are fast, efficient, all of those things. In the past, things like the SRF IOP, it's all kind of annual, like what are we going to do this year? And I saw a lot of evidence, at least in the draft policy we'll be talking about later today, of that kind of similar thinking of what are we going to do with this year's expenditure plan. So I guess the question is about long-term planning and how that fits in with the SAFER program.
Yeah, well, I think that's a big part of it. One of the things, sort of, which is getting into a little bit of the technical details, but after the first year of the program, we actually have a continuous appropriation of the money for the program, which means that we don't have to spend all of that year's money in that year. It means that we can think longer term. I mean, that's part of what that type of appropriation allows you to do, is to think about that at the same time as Joe's going to talk about. We're required to do an expenditure plan every year, and there's requirements to that in terms of describing what types of projects and what funding amounts, and so we have to be able to balance those two things. But certainly, we don't want to sort of just get money out the door because we have a year to spend it. We want to think about, well, what makes sense over the life of the program. Oh, yeah.
I was going to add something to that. So this is really an opportunity to be proactive instead of just reactive. And so there's a couple, I think the needs assessment, which we'll talk about, is one of the ways we are trying to look much more comprehensively and then develop a long-term plan, recognizing that it's not just the systems now that are in violation that we need to worry about or we need to put resources to and think about when we're thinking about solutions, but instead be looking at who's on the brink or who's at risk so that we can get ahead of that problem. And also, therefore, when we're looking at solutions for one community, we can be looking at, are there other communities nearby or in similar situations that where the solution could be shared in some way, or a partnership, or consolidation in some cases. And then one thing that we will be discussing in future meetings is that we are developing a much more transparent tracking program that helps both ourselves internally, but also everybody in the public and in California to see what it is that we're funding, what kind of resources we're providing, and where it is in the pipeline. And I think that will be really helpful for, helping us and helping, communities identify where there's solutions, understand, residents understand where the system is, and get a lot of more details more easily. We have that, but it's in sort of separate places right now, and it's not easy to get. And so I think there's been a lot of resources put into trying to make that much more accessible and transparent and sort of comprehensive, linked between both the drinking water quality and violation side, as well as all the financial assistance side. And we'll be talking about that at future meetings. I think, there's a lot this first meeting to go through, and so it's good to get these kind of foundational questions and key issues that you all have been identifying. And what we're starting to do with this meeting is start to outline the process for the needs assessment, where a lot of these issues will be fleshed out more, and guidance in terms of how we're assessing risk or TMF capacity. That all fits within this needs assessment process, which we'll be talking about, and then in terms of the fund expenditure plan. So, and then I think at the end we'll be going through what the kind of next topics at future meetings, so that you can know that there will be a chance to walk through some stuff that we weren't able to today.
Hello. Okay. So I have maybe a question and some comments, but when we first started talking, we touched on the 410 million that's already available for DAC projects, and you gave some percentages, 85 for CIP and then the 15 for the rest. And I'm wondering if that's something that you're leaning on already, that's the split that you're going to use for the funding that's available through this program, or if that's yet to be determined as part of the needs assessment. And I know we're talking about different communities might need different things, but I'm just trying to get a sense if that's the split that you're kind of looking at. And then the other thing is, I think I heard some ideas about possibly drilling wells also qualifying as projects. And so what I'm thinking about is, would it be possible, or are you considering projects that involve maybe allowing a public water system that has enough capacity? Or, for example, the Coachella Valley Water District covers 1,000 square miles. And the way we serve communities is through separate community water systems. They're not all connected.
Yeah.
And so in the rural areas, it may be possible then, rather than extend the pipeline that's bringing the water from a community water system that's maybe up to the north, to just simply create another kind of satellite standalone community system. But that would require you to probably drill new wells and then extend the pipeline from those wells. But if it pencils out financially to whether that's more reasonable, because there's enough clusters of small water systems that it makes sense, are those possibilities, or is it simply looking at projects to extend pipeline?
No. So, Dame, I'll answer your last question first. But no, I think we want to be as creative as we can in terms of what makes sense over the long term. And so that could be a lot of things. And as you mentioned, when you have communities where it's not possible to physically connect them because of distance and other things, well, we're going to have to look at what other solutions there are. And that could be other sources of water. It could be a lot of different things. And I think, but one of the goals of this program is to be creative about how we do that, so that we're not always having to come back and keep figuring out what the solutions are. We figured out something that does work over the longer term. As far as your question about the split between the capital and the non-capital, and Joe can certainly add to this, part of that is due to those different pots of money, the different color bars there, are what they can legally be used for. And so a big chunk of that money can only be used for capital. And so that's part of what that split is. It's sort of been predetermined for us. And so, one of the things about this program and the 130 million is we have a lot more flexibility with that part of it, at least. And then we're looking to the other pots of money to see what we can be more flexible about. And again, Joe will talk about this a little bit later, but in terms of, whether we can move funds, a project from one funding source to another that allows it to, to have more flexibility in how the funds can be spent. That's part of what we're looking at.
Thank you. And if you just allow me one more comment, I think that, for example, at our water district, we have over 80 of these small water systems clustered around. And when you do a project one by one, you might not see the full impact of the additional supply that you're required to provide.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to say, okay, well, we need to drill a well, right? But when you look at it as a whole, and it's 80 of them, and you're adding a few thousand connections, then the supply issue comes up. And so that's what I think we're trying to figure out is if we were to just move on a project by project, how do we recover what would be considered the impact fee that you would collect to then be able to add additional supply?
Yeah.
And if that's being considered, or if it's simply, okay, here's the cost of the project construction-wise without any of the fees, but then at that point you're not recovering the impact fee to allow for additional supply. And so, I think those are things that we need to think about.
Yeah.
If we're not paying for the supply directly, then a way to allow the districts to recover the fee that they would recover from any other connection, whether it was, private, commercial, public, everybody pays that fee. So
Sure.
Those are things that I think we struggle with.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I don't know that I have a real. Yeah, maybe Joe. Yeah.
Yeah, so actually, can't remember if you were at that meeting, but we met with your staff a few months ago and talked about this very issue because it touches on a couple of different things. One is being more efficient with projects, right? So if we know that there are 8 or 10 projects that could be ready to go in the near term, is addressing them together rather than a series of one-offs, right? So there's that, and when you do look at things more comprehensively like you have, you can take into consideration some of the, what is now the increased demand on your system that's subsuming those other systems. So you could do it traditionally through, connection fees and figuring that out. But what we talked about was, well, if we know what those impacts are, we could actually fund, whatever it is, the additional storage tanks, the additional wells, as long as we're looking at things in that more comprehensive fashion. So I think there are definitely, opportunities to do that.
Okay, thank you. My question stems from, so we're talking a lot about consolidation, and I think we have a lot of these systems that are not failing, they're failed. And to go back to the TMF statement that was made earlier, unfortunately, some of these systems won't be able to be recovered. How do we go in and force these consolidations, or even when a system is willing to consolidate, how do we get the funding to them quickly and allow them to consolidate with a more local water agency? We have a couple that are local to us that have been working through a process for 3 years of trying to consolidate, and it's just been roadblock after roadblock of getting the funding to actually do this. And they've been working through the Prop 1 funding. So it's something that we are seeing where there's these systems that are already failed. We know we can't save them, so let's get them to another system and let's save some of this other money to go to other systems that are failing and allow those systems to become stronger systems. So, we have these, we'll use a grading system, kind of what we do by us. You have the F systems that there's no hope, and we really need to do something to just get them into another system. And then we have the C's and the D's. Let's focus on making those C's and D's, A's and B's, and take those F's and put them into those other systems that can be a stronger system overall.
Well, I think broadly speaking, that is really what we're talking about here. And I think one of the things, again, that we're trying to do is through the program and through the work that that Joe's been doing and working with our district Division of Drinking Water district staff is really being more proactive in looking at the systems, and instead of excuse me, instead of waiting for systems to come to us, for us to be able to look and say, okay, well, these are the 5 systems that are all located over here. We know that there's these different issues, and we go out to them and we say, okay, you know, here's what we're thinking, or consolidations, and here's the funding, and really being more proactive from our side on that. But certainly we want to make sure we're hearing from the systems, from the public about what they think the needs are too.
Yes, I guess just to kind of follow up on that, I would say you have a system that comes to you and they say, hey, we're ready, we want to do this, we don't want to run ourselves anymore. Why a holdup? In the past, there's been quite a holdup on allowing these systems to just get, you know, a little bit of funding to have this other system take them over, and it's you know, we're not talking about $130 million. We're talking about 2 or 3 that gets them into a system, gets these people not drinking these MCLs, not drinking these bad things, and allowing this other system that's already an established system to take care of them. I think it's just the timing, I think, is what I'm focused on. I understand what you're saying too as well.
Well, and thank you for that. And I think the timing is something that we acknowledge that we need to work on, and so we certainly look forward to suggestions on how best to do that. We've already been talking about some ways of doing that, but thank you for pointing that out.
Okay, Jesse, you'll be our last question, and then we're going to have a break.
My question builds a little bit on the one that was just asked. I'm just curious, what are some of the strategies that the board and staff have to accelerate those project timelines? And that would be, you know, for any type of project, not just consolidation projects, although those are certainly could be referred to as low-hanging fruit in some cases because they're just a little bit simpler. But we've got many, you know, types of projects that are pending applications, and I know there's some, you know, hang-ups with just getting contracts out and other mechanical issues at the board. So I'm wondering, what are some of the strategies that we have to look forward to?
I think I'm going to let Joe take the first shot at that.
Yeah, so there are a number of different things that we've talked about. And it's both on the funding side and also with Division of Drinking Water on the enforcement side. So on the funding side, you know, one of the issues that makes it a challenge to get projects through is we're trying to meet federal requirements because we're not sure what the color of the money is going to be, whether it's going to be state or federal, eventually for the capital project. So when we're doing the planning, we're doing maybe more work than we might otherwise need to do. So one of the potential strategies is if we can identify in advance, like, is a project going to get funded with state funds rather than federal, that could be an opportunity to shave some time. You know, we're also looking at our own internal procedures. You know, we you know, generally look at each project in a kind of similar fashion in terms of the types of reviews that we're doing, and in some cases, you know, we may not, as an example, need to do a credit or financial review if it's all grant and it's something that's not necessarily going to you know, increase operation and maintenance costs, or if, say, the system's already done a rate study and, you know, so they're in pretty good shape as far as that goes. But we also see, you know, a number of projects where, you know, the way that the compliance orders are issued, and I think the practice has been, as long as they're sort of in the queue and in the process, that, you know, there won't be necessarily aggressive enforcement. So then that disincentivizes, you know, making progress on, say, a planning project, you know. So that's the other thing we need to do, is make sure that even when we've provided funding, that's moving on at the appropriate pace. And if it's not, you know, we partner with DDW or the local primacy agency to move that along. We're also looking at since we have more funding, providing additional resources through our technical assistance providers. So some of the steps that we might have traditionally taken through a separate planning application agreement and then separate construction application agreement, if we can do more of the planning through our technical assistance providers, then we reduce some of those steps as well. In addition to what I was mentioning before in terms of looking at those opportunities to look more comprehensively at a given area and not just doing kind of a series of one-offs. But as was referred to earlier, that requires some more, I think Michael might have said, some longer term planning, around what could we or should we be doing in this region. So those are just some of the ideas, and definitely we're open to more. But I would say it requires a collective effort, right? It's not just like the Division of Financial Assistance trying to figure out how to do things faster, or Division of Drinking Water doing more enforcement. I think it also requires working with our TA providers to figure out are we establishing appropriate expectations about what can be done and appropriately prioritizing, as well as working with the community as well early on, and kind of being real about what can we get done in what time frame and what really are the priorities.
All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and then we can come back and move on to the needs assessment. All right, folks, if we could please gather back up. There's not, but you know what? If you You know what you can do if you want to? Do you want to? It's kind of weird, but do you want to go behind there so that you're facing out? Are you sure? Okay. All right, folks. So we're going to move on to item 3, our needs assessment. And if you weren't able to get one of the agendas, we went ahead and wrote it up here so you can see the items and the times because we ran out. But I'm going to let Michelle introduce herself.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Frederick, and I am with the State Water Resources Control Board in the Division of Drinking Water. It's nice to see a lot of familiar faces this morning. Oops, that was a little loud. So we are here today to talk about the needs assessment update and where that is, and also where that is in terms of SB 200, not just our partnership that we currently have with UCLA. But I did want to note that the work that we are doing right now is in partnership with UCLA, Pacific Institute, UNC Chapel Hill, their Environmental Finance Center, Corona Environmental Consulting, and Sacramento State. And we have a few of our needs assessments folks here in the back. So we have Greg and Maureen and Laura Feinstein. So Greg back there, I don't know if you can see him. Greg Pierce, you want to stand up and say hi? And then we have Maureen Kerner from Sac State. And we have Laura Feinstein from Pacific Institute. Thank you. So there are other experts here if you want to meet with them and talk to them. So just hang on here. We got down is the way to go there. So the needs assessment chronology, just to give, I know a lot of people here are familiar with the needs assessment, but just in case not everyone is, we wanted to give you sort of a background on it. So in 2018, funding was allocated for a needs assessment, and so we started in 2019 in January. We did two public workshops, and then in May we did a third, and then we had partnership. And then we started to execute a agreement with UCLA's team. So contract development began in May and June of 2019. And then the contract was executed on September 27th of 2019. And so while all of this was happening, SB 200 was also going on in the background. And so we had that, which was approved by the governor in July 24th, 2019. So one of the things that I think is different about where we were than where we are today was that effort was really focused, the contract with UCLA was really focused on, how quickly can we make this happen to inform the potential for funding. And I think now that Senate Bill 200 has been approved, I think there's a different sort of opportunity here for us to look a little bit further to respond to some of the comments that we received and to sort of take it further than we would have before. So we are very appreciative of that opportunity. So just a little more background. So the current contract that we have is about $3 million with UCLA, and then the funds according to the legislature, must be encumbered by June 2020, which they already have been, and liquidated by June 2021. So there were 3 elements that we initially looked at for this contract. There was sort of identification of public water systems that are at risk or in violation. So obviously in violation, to some extent was easy. We already have the human right to water list, although there are some subtleties and some other things that we'd like to look at in the future. But then there's also the at-risk component, which people have been discussing today, and questions about that, which were great to hear. And then the second element that we were looking at is how to identify domestic wells, state small water systems that are at risk. So one of our workshops was on this and how to, well, I guess there was a workshop on each one of these items. And those you can find on our website as well if you're still interested in seeing them. But and then the third element that we looked at was a cost analysis for the interim and long-term solutions. Sorry. So those are on our website if you at any point want to go back and look for those. And then partnership roles. Oops, I have to remember to move this forward here. So I wanted to just share who is working on each one of those elements. So in the identification of public water systems in risk, right now the University of California at Los Angeles, so UCLA, is working on that portion of it with UNC's Environmental Finance Center. But we are also building off work that others are doing. You know, we're looking at what the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment has. We are working with Department of Water Resources, who was doing drought planning and who also had a needs assessment activity. And so thinking about the long term, how do we incorporate what other people are doing? How do we bring that to bear for the long term is important to us. And so for the element number 2, the identification of individual domestic wells and state smalls, our Division of Water Quality at the state board is taking the lead on that role. They are going to be creating hazard maps for outreach statewide that will be ultimately put on our website so that people can know what areas in the state may have contamination of different types. We've also been assisted by Water Foundation, who provided a grant to RCAC to help us do the initial outreach to the counties, which we were greatly appreciative of. And then I also know that the Water Equity Science Shop, which is also often referred to as West was also, DWQ was also looking to work with them and build off some of the work that they are already doing. So in terms of partnership roles for element 3, which was the cost analysis and the long-term solutions, that's being worked on by Corona Environmental Consulting, who's also done some other work in this area, some regionalization work, and also some assessments of long-term O&M. So we're trying to leverage what they already had. We're also working with Stack State's Environmental Finance Center. Stack State is also one of our TA providers, so there's a lot of synergies there and what they're already doing and looking at that. And Pacific Institute has historically done work in a lot of different levels, looking at needs and risk, and also UCLA. And then our Division of Financial Assistance is also providing input on where we have cost available, cost data, so that they're able to look back at what we have done historically. So element number 1 has a few different layers. So I'm just going to start drilling down a little bit into each of the elements. Element number 1 speaks to identification of public water systems in violation at risk. And I know that there is concern about how we call them. Are they at risk? Are they on a watch list? What are they? And so we are cognizant of those concerns. I'm saying risk as a general term in this, but we do want to be thoughtful about that when we go forward, so that there aren't any unintended consequences or negative impacts. But that is something we're aware of. So For phase one, what we're looking at is community water systems and non-transient community water systems up to 3,300 connections. And some of that will be dependent on available funding, but also something that we can take longer term and expand. So right now we're looking at several different risk factors, monitoring and reporting violations, source capacity, things like that. Phase two, we're looking at income versus water rate screening, so for medium-sized systems. So things like the ability for systems between 3,300 connections to 100,000 connections. Is the community limited in their income such that water rates are a problem? And then phase three, we're looking at the financial capacity and creating rate dashboards with UNC. And so element two, this is sort of an example of what our Division of Water Quality is working on. They're trying to look at different areas in the states where MCLs may be impacted. And so they are trying to estimate domestic water quality for all chemicals right now with an MCL in each public land survey system section. They're trying to estimate populations for potentially impacted domestic wells. So for each 1 mile by 1 mile section, how many people or how many domestic wells may be impacted in that area. And then they're providing those results to the University of Los Angeles to help include that in the needs assessment. And so, as I said, you know, all of this was going on in the background. SB 200 was evolving as we were evolving the needs assessment. And so one of the things that came out of SB 200 was a requirement for these hazard maps. So we were already starting to work on them, but then that now was a requirement. So the state board has a requirement to provide these hazard maps by January 1st, 2021, and then do annual updates on those maps. And they're also required, we are required, I say they being the Division of Water Quality, but it is us as a whole. But we're required to consult with local health officers and other relevant stakeholders. So we are in the process of reaching out to the California Conference of Environmental Health Directors, reaching out to other stakeholders like you all to think about how we can incorporate that level of risk data or you know, potential level of risk. And then also small water systems and data from domestic wells is required to be submitted to the state board starting from 2014 forward. And so that is something that then will be incorporated in the 2022 update of those hazard maps. So, you know, we're really going to anticipate a lot of stakeholder engagement around this process and also in the needs assessment as we go forward. And this may be one of the touching places that we do that, but then we are also planning to do additional workshops specific to the needs analysis and also those hazard maps. So just focusing on this coming year, you know, just sort of what our preliminary deliverables are from the UCLA team. We're looking to do, as I mentioned, public input and feedback. We'll also be looking at doing high-risk mapping workshops and sort of going forward, you know, taking what UCLA has developed and building on that current work to sort of refine what risk means in the future. What are the various levels of that? What kind of outreach to support communities to get that data that environmental health folks may have, and also the creation of the hazard maps. So just sort of as a timeline, we're looking at 2020 having various drafts available. looking at sort of technical, managerial, financial capacity analyses for some of our water systems, looking at the affordability piece for those middle-sized water systems, and then also some long-term solutions for those water systems that are on the human right to water list. And then in fall 2020, we are looking at having drafts of sort of the long-term solutions for our at-risk lists, and also the financial capacity tool in sort of an early version for people to look at and consider. And then spring 2021 is when all of the final reports are due from UCLA. So rate and risk analysis, funding needs, and the final version of the tool. Oops, I went the wrong way. Okay, so what really excites me is that we now have 9 new positions to work on this. This has historically been done with contractors because we didn't have the staff to do this. Prior to my current position, I was the consolidation and water partnership person for Northern California and doing the needs analysis. And so now we have 9 new positions that are just going to be focused on the needs analysis, which is very exciting. So we have a senior environmental scientist, 4 water resource control engineers, 2 environmental scientists, and 2 government analysts who will focus on the TMF that we just talked about. So, you know, state smalls, domestic wells, TMF, and sort of looking at solution development and cost estimates. So, you know, we're really looking for input, I think, today to not just on the UCLA model, but how we can take that and go forward with these new staff positions. You know, I heard a lot of discussion early on. Sure, it's technical, financial, and managerial capacity. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, really wanting your input on how this unit could go forward and take what we're already building on. So just for discussion, questions, I'm here, and we're really looking forward to today's discussion and insight. So thank you.
Okay, so we'll go around the table.
Thank you, Michelle. Could you talk a little bit about the alignment with the work that's being done with the needs assessment and the draft report that came out last year from OEHA that looked at how you could potentially, there were different factors about how to determine system risk and how you plan on using that information, if you are planning on using that information, and how you plan to align it with the group of consultants that you have helping you, because it seems like there may be some differences in the work that they're doing versus what OEHA came up with.
You know, I think we're going to look at, you know, we are aware of obviously OEHA's work and sort of affordability sort of criteria that they're looking at, and also the layers of how long people have been out of compliance to sort of inform for us as well, that kind of level. We're not specifically at this point taking what they're doing exactly into our analysis, just in parts they were developing that at the same time we were developing ours. But I do see that being more aligned as we go forward with new staff, and to be able to take that and sort of try and integrate it more. We're actually working on contracting with them right now, and so that alignment is sort of in the process and in the thoughts.
Yeah, my name's Don. I was wondering if you're going to be able to, how are the tribes going to be able to access this money, and if the consultation is going to take place and what have you. I know just me being on the board's kind of a lot of weight for me, but so.
There we go. Okay, so that's a great question, and thank you for your interest. I have reached out personally to US EPA to get the list of systems that they have in violation so that we can at least be aware of what those are. Obviously, and we did have some tribal folks at our public workshops, but going forward, we can, I think in February, March, there is an Indian Health Services organization that has an annual meeting, and so we are hoping to engage at that point as well. But we are, this year we may very well be focusing on those water systems that are on the human right to water list. And so ones, water systems that are within the tribal area would certainly be eligible for this funding as well. Does that answer your question? Or? Okay, it does. It totally does. So we are trying to look at what some of, and Leslie and I know others in the Division of Financial Assistance are looking at, some of those other questions as well.
Yes, Sergio Carranza with Pueblo Unido. I think it will be also important for, I know that you discussed that UCLA will be actually consulting with certain people, but in the Eastern Coachella Valley, we have the largest population of stay smalls in California. So we work a lot with those. There are mobile home parks known as Polanco parks. So we provide technical assistance to that, and as a matter of fact, we're actually assisting the US GPS because they're doing an similar analysis for that region. And but that requires, in addition to work in coordination with the Riverside County Environmental Health Department, with Coachella Valley Water District, to outreach the community as well. And there is a kind of delicate situation because we don't want to just to label, oh, you have a water contamination issue, so you don't want to panic people, so why are you actually coming to ID my well and all this stuff? So I will strongly recommend UCLA also to contact TA providers as well as community leaders so that that program can be properly introduced in those areas, so to prevent any kind of misleading information or panicking among those communities. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I might say too that there is, in addition to this new unit, there are also two other new units. One is a Northern California engagement unit. So it will have 5 engineers and a senior engineer and some administrative support, but they are supposed to be doing more engagement. And that was a question that came up earlier in sort of getting out and doing that outreach. So definitely afterwards, maybe we can talk some more because I'd like to.
Yeah, Michael Claiborne. Question on, well, actually, an initial question is just, should I hold questions about the progress done so far on the needs assessment? Is there going to be a presentation on what's been done in the last, I know a lot of work's been done.
So we are going to hold a separate workshop to talk about specifically what needs have been done because this forum has a lot of other issues that they want to talk about, but we just wanted to provide sort of an overview for that. But yes, there has been a lot of work done to date, and we have received some draft results that we're still in the process of sort of going through. Does that answer your question, Michael? Or?
It does, yeah, and it brings up, I guess, a few follow-up questions if I have a minute. First is on at-risk water systems. Do you know what factors y'all are looking at for screening, which systems are at risk, which are doing better? Is there a list that we could review?
There is a list, and in fact, I have a copy of the contract that has a list on it, so I'd be happy to give that to you. There are 14 of them, so I don't want to run through all of them, but I'd be happy to go over them with anybody who wants to.
Okay, great.
And I might say they may evolve as well because, we are looking at, potentially amendments to the contract if there's something that we haven't thought of or those may roll into this new unit for us to sort of rethink.
Yeah, okay, that would be great. I know there's a lot of expertise around this table and in this room, and would love to have input early on in the process on that. And then just wanted to highlight 2 issues. First, glad to see all the work around domestic wells. That's definitely a concern of ours to make sure that they're addressed well in this program. Question on just outreach well testing, whether that's started already, whether I know there's well testing was mentioned in SB 200. I know we're talking about the needs assessment, so trying to figure out how those fit. And then I didn't see a lot on point of use, point of entry, but I had a question about how that's being factored in.
I think I muted. Okay. So to your first question about outreach, our first outreach is really to the counties themselves to get data that already exists from 2014. So that at this point is our biggest effort, because I think that's where we're going to understand where some of the holes may be. So that to me is the first part. In terms of POU, POE, let me just make sure I understand your question. Is it, I mean, that's, you know, when we talk about interim solutions or long-term solutions, that's one of the, you know, potential alternatives that we're considering. So, but what specifically are you interested in?
I guess the question is the extent to which the costs of point of use, point of entry is going to be factored in to the final kind of needs assessment.
So, I mean, there is in that needs assessment umbrella under costs, you know, that is something that we're considering. We are looking back and, you know, there isn't as much data available. And I see Maureen out there shaking her head, but, you know, there's not quite as much data as there is for other types. But we are trying to use that and put that in our cost model to see, you know, what the alternatives, you know, and the most appropriate alternative for our model would be.
Okay, that's helpful. And then just one other thing to highlight, more of an issue to figure out than a question, but how we address systems that are already treating and so have unaffordable rates, and how that factors into the needs assessment and then SB 200. And in particular, I'm thinking of places like Cantua Creek, which has really, really high water rates, but doesn't necessarily, well, they're still working on safe drinking water as well, but has proactively already tried to get at that issue.
Yes, this is Horacio. One of the problems that we have in our area is that more contamination is happening. As more extraction of the water by industries, the concentration of the chemicals, they go up, and pretty soon you had a water, clean water that was giving water to residents, and now it's gone. Do you have any data that is going to show where the water, the clean water, is being protected, and also how many wells already been shut off, and how much is the amount of contamination that is going to be spreading out through the area? Because if we don't have a history of a clean water well, on how is it clean and is it going up and up to the way that it's already out of compliance, how are we going to make plans to connect people that don't have clean water?
Okay, so I think that's a great point. I think there's 2 elements of that. I think, you know, working with our regional boards is a big part of that in areas where there may be some sort of industrial chemical that has been put in the well. I also, you know, it's a discussion we have had internally in the needs assessment group. I know that there is data that one of our contractors had access to based on some other work that they had done that looked at sort of the 80% level, like where are in the state, are we over 80% of the MCLs, so that we're not just looking at, you know, people that are over now. We are really trying to focus on the future. And so whether that is included in the UCLA work or not, with their team, that is definitely something that we're talking about and thinking about, and may in the future be another risk factor that we are using.
And just one thing to add, as Michelle mentioned, I mean, we are talking with the regional boards. We're also making sure we're coordinating with efforts like CV Salts, but also the Sigma efforts. And so, linking those sort of other policy work with this program, and then also through the high risk mapping, I think hopefully we can get to some of that. I think it's gonna take us some time to get there, but we acknowledge that there are a lot of these different things going on, and we need to, for the safe drinking water part, we need to be able to pull them together, certainly.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm happy you mentioned that there's all these things kind of moving along, and that's what I wanted to talk about. Was the draft was released earlier this month for the water resilience portfolio, and I did see at the end of it that there was a listing of all the different regions, I think, and it had a number of things of how those different regions through the aquifers, I think, categorized, and one of them was, I think, water quality concerns. And so what I wanted to get a sense of is how much of that is already going to be used as part of this needs assessment in terms of like the water quality data that was used to categorize those different basins or regions. Because I think, when I looked at maybe some of the Central Valley, they had the highest score, which I think was from 1 to 4, that they were a 4. And then I looked at some other regions where I thought there was, the area was probably as bad as that region, and they got a 3. And so I think one of the things that we were trying to figure out is, because I think right now it's open for public comment. And as a region, I think we're trying to figure out what's the best way for us to submit information so that we're properly categorized. So if we believe that we're a 3, that we're a 4, and we're categorized as a 3, how do we submit that information? Who do we submit it to? And is that going to help with the needs assessment that we're working on here?
Well, certainly I would say that, they are using public, well, there's some complexities to it in terms of depths of aquifers and what aquifer are we looking at and things like that. But beyond that, I mean, I think to your question, the hazard maps that are being developed are, we are open to accepting more data. We are looking for more data. So, if that data, if you have data that's available, that's not at you think, that probably isn't at your county, we are interested in making sure that that's in our system, if it is not already, to help properly categorize that. And, I would be happy to, my contacts up there, but I can talk to you afterwards too about who to talk to in our Division of Water Quality. John Borkovich, his team is working on this, so I'm sure we can put you in contact with them.
Okay, thank you. And one more comment.
Yes, absolutely.
I think the thing said that those maps are due January 2021.
Correct.
And
the first cut.
And so my question is that going to be enough time to incorporate the new census? Is all because I think you say you're mapping all the different
so there are
the public lands, right? You're going on the sections and all that, and so
there are 2 different pieces of that. I think, there is the hazard mapping that's required in SB 200, and then there is the hazard mapping that we're doing to inform the UCLA team, and where we're informing the UCLA team, that right now they're looking at populations, and that's a lot to consider. Is consolidation an option? Is there a regionalization option there? But going forward, I would encourage you to go to the public meetings that we have on that, because I can't answer your question about whether or not there'll be enough time to overlay that, or whether or not that will be overlaid for the purposes of the maps that are on our website. But certainly it's a good thought to incorporate that for a lot of different reasons going forward.
So it seems like there's no way that we could actually kind of get into the weeds on this given the timing for today. So I was wondering a couple of things. I have one research related question and then one completely off topic, not off topic, but not research needs assessment related question. The first is earlier in the morning, we were asking what the performance metrics were and the methods. And I was wondering if that information is going to become publicly available or available to this group in a more intensive way so that we can kind of leave here, go look at it, and then come back with feedback since we can't really provide detailed feedback yet. So that's question one.
Okay. Do you want to give me both of them and then
I can give you the second one.
Why
Sure.
don't you give me
So
the
my
second one,
second
Camille?
question was piggybacking what Don had asked about tribes. So in my experience, and it may be outdated because I haven't worked on this for 4 years, but historically the Department of Financial Assistance, or Division of Financial Assistance rather, has asked tribes to waive sovereignty in order to receive funding. And I wanted to double check to ask if that is still required, if that's going to be looked at again or changed, because it's become a really significant impediment, especially for federally recognized tribes.
So I will definitely punt that second question over to Joe. But into your first question, you know, and I appreciated your question earlier. I was like, yes, TMF questions. I think that what we'll be looking at is really sort of the at-risk, and I think we're, you know, in two different ways we're trying to get at TMF. We're trying to get at TMF through this needs analysis. You know, a single source is one of the risk factors we're looking at. You know, whether or not people are, if they're supposed to be registered with the Secretary of State as an organization, are they? And so a lot of these risk factors are giving us the numbers of water systems that have this sort of risk. And so that informs us on areas where perhaps we need some sort of clarity on what the expectation is. And so that's informing us through the risk. And then also there are some water systems that are specifically being evaluated for TMF, and those are systems that are not clearly high risk, that are kind of borderline for us to decide, okay, should they be in the risk category or should they be in the sort of we're okay category? And so that's where they're going. But then there's also internally, we do have a work group that's working on incorporating more TMF questions into our sanitary surveys. And so I think the ideal will be to collect all of that data and then look at where we stand and where we find deficiencies and where it appears that we have good metrics and things are working well so that we can define what we may want long term. Does that answer your question?
Ish. I think my question was a little bit more mechanical. It was, will we be able to see the metrics, methods, and models so that we can give you more targeted feedback?
Sure. I mean,
yeah, kind of what's the engagement process, given that some of the workshops have already happened, but now we have the Safer Advisory Group.
Right. So yeah, we do anticipate having a workshop probably March, April time period, specifically around the needs analysis. And that would be incorporated in that. I mean, you're certainly welcome to, Camille. I'd be happy to get you a copy of what the contract says and sort of what we're looking at specifically so that you have that.
Thank you.
Okay, the second question was about sovereign immunity. So my attorney can correct me if I'm wrong. So it's not a total waiver, it's a limited waiver. And essentially when we enter into a funding agreement, it's a contract between the two parties. So we have to be able to, for our side, enforce the contract if needed. With things like, you know, be able to go to see if the project was actually built, you know, or be able to review the documentation related to the expenditures. So it's not some broad waiver of sovereign immunity. It's really limited to the contract and the project that we're funding.
We've also, this is an issue I know at the state board that we're really focused on, is making sure that, you know, in the statute, tribes are eligible, and we want to make that both clear and real. And so we have been doing a lot of discussions internally and also reaching out to our sister agencies to learn, if DWR has different ways of doing things that have addressed things. But I think that look forward to continuing the discussion on how to make sure tribes that we do adequate consultation and make sure that this is truly accessible.
I know that these assessments are critical. They're important to have a better understanding of the realm and the needs for each community. And every single region is different than the other ones. However, I bring the perspective of the community. 2 decades have elapsed since we find out that in the Eastern Coachella Valley we have a lot of arsenic contamination and fluoride. So when Pueblo Unido started to engage into these things, we realized, oh my gosh, we need to find viable interim solutions right now. We cannot wait another decade to initiate an array of, studies and reports and analysis and all that stuff. So we actually work in partnership with the Coachella Valley Water District, and under Proposition 84, we started the short-term arsenic remediation program back in 2012. So today we have installed over 300 units, point of use, to this state mall, serving over 1,500 people. We did that because we understood the need, and we knew that we're trying to actually consolidate those communities. It's taking over a decade to consolidate those communities. So I really, really want just to the staff to realize that you're gonna have a lot of urgency from us. And I will probably recommend to UCLA also to come to see and analyze this program that we have, because we have we need more capacity in terms of funding to actually continue the operation of this project. But this is a good case study that they can actually do, how we were able to implement these units and how people is participating and getting training about how to properly read the different MCL levels. We have ranging levels from 25 parts per billion all the way to 92 in arsenic. So that's one of the other recommendations I will strongly provide, because we cannot wait any longer to do these reports to be concluded. This might expedite this process.
Thank you. No, I think that's excellent. Thank you.
Lucy from Wisconsin. We want the needs of domestic well owners to be prioritized as the needs assessments, because like in my community, I was the president for the mutual water company in my community, and the center of our community got connected to the city, but then there is all this surrounding our community with private well owners that were left behind, and we want to make sure that nobody is left behind on this project.
Yeah, and I think so. Part of that is, the risk mapping is going to allow us to look more broadly, regionally and in, communities, not just looking at the public systems themselves, but also looking at what's the risk for everybody who's there, if they have private wells or state smalls. And part of what we then need to figure out once we have that data is, how do we try to address everybody, because the solutions may be different for public water system versus a community that has private wells, but it might be some of the same things. And so hopefully the needs assessment and the mapping and things like that will help to bring those solutions together. So that's our hope for how to do that best.
I understand that UCLA is collecting the data, but I think that it's important to make sure that we get to somebody in our communities, like make sure that they talk to a leader from our communities, because like right now these days people are afraid to open the doors, so they don't have the right information if they don't check their wells. And most of our people, they don't check their wells, they don't even know what's in their water. And I think this is something important, that we need to have a leader in our communities to make sure we go to a person that they trust, that they would be comfortable.
I would absolutely agree with you on that. And I know in some of our consolidation efforts in the Central Valley, we've had problems with people not coming to public meetings for that very reason. And I guess I would ask you how to engage with them. And maybe that's a conversation you and I can have about what would be the best methods to really do that, because I think that's very important. I mean, we can go through the counties because that's sort of a clearinghouse of environmental information and health information, but if there are other ways that we should be engaging, we would really like to know.
And if I could add to that, I mean, part of the thing when we've been hiring our staff, our own staff for this program, is we've been trying to be very careful about bringing people who will be able to engage with the communities, and who know that part of their job will be to be a contact for the communities. So we have new staff in the Division of Drinking Water, who that's what their role will be. And we have new staff in our Office of Public Participation, and that's a big part of what they're going to be doing, is making sure that our interactions with the communities are going as smoothly as they can. And then also, as we have been, working with the local assistance providers and the people who really, who know the communities well. So that is very important to us for this program. And thank you for bringing that up.
Just a quick comment on that, on the way that I think projects get rolled out. They're always, at least the way when I look at projects, there always seems to be like a project sponsor, right? Whether it's a city, water district, a nonprofit, or whoever the sponsor is, that really kind of takes the responsibility of putting the project together. And I think that's who's responsible for understanding what the needs are, right? And so I think one of the things that we've always kind of advocated for is that the local water agencies have the capacity sometimes to really take on that role, understanding the water quality in their area, who's connected, who's not connected, what can potential projects be. And so what I think it's important for the local water agencies or the consolidating agencies to a lot of times kind of take the lead on these type of projects, because they're able to really have a holistic view of the area. And one of the problems that I've ran into, with the other hat, I work for I manage a public system for the city of Coachella, and so we have various projects going through the SRF program, both for clean water and drinking water. And sometimes when you're trying to put a project together and you're trying to put pieces together, you have parties that don't participate, and then you have to make a determination as to whether you move with the project without a certain component, or whether you let the project stall for another 2 years or 3 years. And so that's a very real thing. A lot of times, just for the lack of participation or folks not providing data or meeting the requirements that you need to submit in order to make the application, you end up having to say, okay, well, we have to move on. We have to move on because everybody else kind of seems to want to get this project going. And so, I mean, that's a real issue, and I've seen it. I've experienced it as a person that tries to drive a project that we've had. And another one is we have to deal with other agencies too, like the counties that have land jurisdiction, and sometimes they make it hard for the public agency that's trying to put a project together to say whether, if you include this portion, then we might make it hard to issue permits. Because of non-compliance with other things. So it's complicated, and so sometimes if you leave folks out, it's because of other reasons. even though really you should consolidate them, but there's sometimes some other reasons why they don't make it to the project. But those are things that need to be addressed for sure.
And I think, thank you for that point too. Having done a lot of consolidation work, that is a real issue, is making sure that everyone, that fine line between including everyone and keeping the project going is very real. I do hope that, and I think when we're talking about the human right to water systems, that, pushing it forward to get those long-term solutions is very important. And hopefully, as we're talking about at-risk areas, or, we will have more of a chance to outreach. And so hopefully through that, we'll get more people included.
And I mean, just to give you an example, there's a project that we're working on right now that includes consolidating 9 systems into, it's one project, and it's 9 different systems. That's 9 different owners.
Yeah.
And you're trying to get all of them on the same page and at the same pace so that you can pencil out the project. And it just takes one owner to maybe not be as fast as the other ones to start kind of holding the project. And then a lot of times, you deal into, you kind of run into the situation where the community members do want the project, but they're not the owners. And so it's a lot of times comes down to the owner too. How is the owner willing to consolidate? Even is he willing? Is he not willing to, even though all his tenants are willing to?
Right.
Those are all real issues. But I just wanted to make that point.
And I thank you for making the point of the public agencies, because I think that's a huge factor. I mean, we really would love to see our public agencies doing what Coachella Valley is doing. I mean, it's a fantastic project. I mean, I know they were looking at 80 different water systems in the area and really doing a feasibility of all of that. So thank you for your work and also for making that point.
Hello. Yes, that was one of our challenges, exactly, that the owners were the only ones, because we did take a survey and we did get signatures, hoping to get the 50+1% so that the water wouldn't be raised. And that was a lot of the problem, was that some of the owners didn't live in town, but yet the people that rented were the ones that were actually paying the water, but they wouldn't count them. They only wanted to count the ones that were the owners. And a good amount of the properties didn't have the owners living locally. And yes, we also faced a challenge in that a lot of people were afraid to even open the door to us because they felt like we're going to get retaliated by the water company, or they're going to call immigration on us and things like that. And since it was really hard because we went door to door, and sometimes we had to go more than once to certain streets. And so we were able to get some community members that would help us. And of course, they were not familiar with them. And that's going to be a challenge if they're not familiar with whoever goes out, because they were afraid to open the door. And so, yes, they definitely would need to have a little bit of notice ahead of time and know that you're coming out. And I'm not sure. And as well, the census is not correct, because I also know that a lot of people don't want to say they're living there. And so we are supposedly we're 3,300 residents, but that may just be the students that are going there, just about makes up that number. And so there's a lot of factors, and that has made it real difficult. And we're gonna probably also face a challenge as far as it's going in through the community to our Pixley Town Council, because people from the water board are on that board as well. And so what would be one of the things probably you would do to help as far as that goes?
I mean, I have personally gone and spoke, at city council meetings. I've gone and talked to LAFCOs, both at the Cal LAFCO annual conference and with individual LAFCOs. We've also, when we do door-to-door surveys, usually lots of times it's through RCAC, and there is a lot of outreach for, to get the median household income, or we've had community meetings where we do them at the elementary school instead of doing them at a government building or something like that, so that, it's walking distance from the community. It's at a location that people are comfortable with. So we've done different strategies depending on where we are and what we're doing. But I'm always open to more, more strategies on ways to better reach people.
And actually, now that you say that, it would be very beneficial, I think, to go through the school, because community liaison has real good rapport with the community.
Yeah.
And so, yes, that would be definitely a positive way to go.
Good, good. Yeah, I actually got that from our Office of Public Participation. So, yeah.
In regards to when communities have problems with water, our community spent 9 years without drinking water. It only took 4 months to get the well done and get connected. And so how do we make it more simple so the project is going and get water to the people? Also, many people don't want to test their water because they don't want their property to be devaluated because they don't get loans or they cannot sell the property. Isn't it better that there's a mandate to test every water in California, every single well, and see how much water they're taking out and what's the real amount of contamination? Isn't it possible for the legislature to do that?
I'm going to let, I mean, I know that there were some discussions about, when you sell a property, I think that was in one of the executive orders, that potentially you have to sample the well for areas that might be, listed as potential contaminants. I mean, so to your point, I don't know the level. I mean, certainly you can kick in here, Laura, but to where that extent is going to go. But I know that there are a lot of different thoughts on that. And I've also heard a lot of discussion about concern about property values when, when hazard maps come out. And so those are real issues. And it's one of the reasons we're really wanting to do very broad stakeholder engagement around those that hazard mapping tool, is to make sure that we are quantifying it in a way that is accurate and careful, but also is thoughtful. I mean, because I have arsenic in my well, maybe, my neighbor doesn't. And so not, understanding what the risks are carefully and putting the right nomenclature on what we do. So
Also, many communities, they've been waiting for funding and they don't have a sponsorship from county or foundations. Nobody wants to sponsor them, so they just sit there for years because nobody's sponsoring. And how is the public going to get help if nobody sponsors them?
So I do think, part of our engagement teams now, when we're out doing projects, we will be looking, are there people along a pipeline? If we're going to do consolidation, and as we get better mapping tools, we are going to reach out to state smalls that are along those pipelines, reach out to individual well owners along those pipelines to try and incorporate them. In areas where we have to do outreach to make that happen, sort of the sponsorship, we can also use technical assistance providers that are familiar with the area to outreach to them. And so I do think there are mechanisms moving forward that will allow for that better than we have historically done. And in terms of your time, the time period for consolidations, definitely I understand that too. I've been in those same situations and they're complicated, but the urgency is definitely there. And so what we've been doing on some of the consolidations that I've been working on is, we have monthly meetings. We include DFA, we include ourselves, we include the cities and the residents, and everybody has their tasks. We have our engineers, and we're pushing those along, I think, a lot faster now than we used to. So that's one of the ways we're going about it.
Are you going to be able to work with the counties and mandate them to help?
Just going to add on this topic. I mean, I know that there's have been a lot of challenges with communities that may not have a legal entity or otherwise may not be in a position to accept funds and be able to move a project forward. And so one of the things in addition to the funding we're talking about is implementation tools that we have now as a state in terms of, and some more flexibility with this more flexible funding source to make sure that TA providers and administrators are able to move projects forward without having to create or be prevented from doing that because of these legal entity challenges. And so I think we absolutely are striving to be working with every single county, as well as communities and technical assistance providers, and both folks in the public and private sector, local agencies, regional groups, to figure out how to make sure we're moving projects forward. I think what we're looking at is maybe not having to be quite as restricted as we were before about what types of structures need to be in place to move a project forward. Certainly the long-term solution needs to be something that's sustainable and that there's an entity that can long-term run it. But I think some of these implementation tools again, these are good topics to make sure that we have future meetings to really get into the details on.
And just one last question. Projects that are being ready, are they going to be funded this year or next year?
Joe, that's...
I'm going to jump in on this one because we're running short on time on this topic. We're going to be talking about that in our next item. So if we could just defer that to the parking lot and we'll get back to it. Thank you.
One more comment. We actually saw 3 elements that had been considered for the assessment. And I want to pick up on what Castello said, the difficulty of some certain owners not wanting to actually connect, right? But there is the other case where you rally the community, because basically, historically, the reason why these communities don't have any municipal services is because they have been discriminated. Nobody argue that. Everyone knows in this room. That's the bottom line. Everyone will probably agree with me on that. So what we have done is to organize the community. We have done a lot of outreaching, a lot of organizing, a lot of training and education, so that the community is the one telling us what kind of priorities they have for drinking water. And that is the reason why we have came out with the projects that we're working in the Eastern Coachella Valley. They are community-driven projects. So in my opinion, just to have a better assessment of the needs and how do we properly allocate funding for these communities, we need to have an understanding about community dynamics. So 4 elements should be included as well to understand community engagement and education. What kind of provisions, what kind of opportunities and accessing as for those communities that perhaps wants to connect, but there are no resources for organizing, there are no resources for them to actually convey their priorities, convey the need to have more drinking water. How can we actually expedite this process? How can our voices be heard? That's basically the fundamental, interpretation of the drinking access for human rights to drinking water. That's pretty much the premises of that legislation. So we definitely can talk all day about technical engineering and water flows, hydraulic analysis, you name it. That's what we do all the time. But if we don't understand the community aspect of it, we are doing a disservice, purpose in trying to come out with a more, profound, accurate assessment.
I think that's an excellent point, and I would absolutely agree that that should probably be another, going forward, another one of our primary elements. You're absolutely right. Thank you.
Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left in this session. We haven't received any comment cards, but perhaps people from the audience, just as a reminder, is there anyone in our audience currently that does want to speak? We have a couple of folks. 3, 4. Okay. And it's again specifically on this topic. That's why we're requesting the comment card so we know what topic you want to. It looks like there's 4. If you want to go ahead and raise your hand again, and I'll just come around maybe. Here we go. We'll start here.
I'm going to come over here so I can see everybody. Good morning. My name is Melissa Sparks-Kranz with the Association of California Water Agencies. I first want to start by saying thank you to the State Water Board. We really appreciate that you're hosting this public advisory group meeting today and that we can participate. AQUA is a organization that represents local public water agencies. So we represent over 450 public water agencies that provide about 90% of the water for commercial, residential, and agricultural use in California, for those that are not familiar with what AQUA is. And I just wanted to make some brief comments today, 3 brief comments about the needs assessment, and just kind of reiterate actually already comments that you have all made, advisory group members. So thank you for engaging and providing a really great conversation. So the first is that the needs assessment really should be focused on solutions and be solution oriented, and that the efforts to collect and present need to align with what the solution is. So as the board, as you're moving forward with finalizing kind of the first elements, that's really critical, that we see what the solution is. And in particular, that the solutions are long-term and moving systems from unsustainable to sustainable. And it's already been made a comment today, but that communities have different facts and data and community dynamics that really contribute to the specific solution that's going to work. The second point is on the scope, and we just have a strong focus that, or a strong suggestion that the focus, and it's in the first element of the needs analysis, but that we focus on chronically systems in chronic violation of federal and state safe drinking water standards. Those are the known communities we've heard from advisory group members today. We know there are needs out there, and we know we need to prioritize those needs. And that's my final comment, is that there be some form of prioritization. When the needs assessment comes out, you'll be releasing different elements, but that there is a way for us the public to understand and see the prioritization of the needs, and so that we can direct that with available funding, whether it be SB 200 funding for operation and maintenance or other needs, but there's other available sources out there that the state has, and at the department, at the state board, but other capital costs that can be leveraged or funding that can be leveraged to support solutions. So those are our comments. Thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you, Melissa.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Clary, the Water Program Manager for Clean Water Action. Sorry, I have all my comments on my phone. So since the general information came without public comment, I'm going to comment on that. And the only 2 things I have to say are, could you please update your webpage? Because I wasted a lot of time trying to find information about this meeting. And if we want this to be a public process, could you please, when you send someone to the Human Right to Water webpage, have something for them to find when they get there? And second, I know I'm the most nearsighted person here, but one of your folks in OPPR needs to work on PowerPoint design, because I should move forward, but I came late, so I sat in back. So just saying, I would really like to be able to read what you're saying, or you can make them available ahead of time. just to say on the needs assessment, we're really excited to see information. I know that I'm really interested in the hazard maps. What I would like to understand is that the needs assessment has a gap analysis as part of it, so we know what needs to be done and can plan it out. Because the one thing that's really exciting about this program is that we get to program things out in multiple years. We don't have to get it all done right away. And I just also want to say everyone has been making fantastic comments. I particularly like Horacio talking about needs of the homeless and Sergio talking about the difficult about how to make the agencies actually be as responsive as the communities are. And so just all great comments, and look forward to commenting again.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Good morning, everyone, or I guess good afternoon now. Kind of hide behind this pillar, so coming around. Before I begin, Jonathan Nelson with the Community Water Center, I just wanted to state how thrilled we are to see so many incredible community leaders and community members on this advisory committee, and also what a momentous milestone this is. After more than a decade of work by people in this room and so many communities, to be able to have a Drinking Water Fund Advisory Committee is pretty exciting. So with that said, our Community Water Center does have a few comments on the needs assessment. I'm going to try to get through these quickly because I know it's lunchtime. First, I want to echo a couple of comments that Jennifer said, particularly around just making information available beforehand, although we recognize that this came together pretty quickly. So just as we move forward, the more we can push information out, the better. Second, and to echo a comment from Advisory Committee member Lucy Hernandez, we would like to see a more rigorous focus around assessing the needs of domestic well communities and state small communities, both for short and long-term solutions. And also, more generally, we want to see more testing being done for domestic well communities to understand their needs. We are very aware of the challenges around the data that's available for domestic well communities. We're also aware that there's some new data sets and resources coming out of institutions like UC Berkeley that we think would be very relevant to this, this discussion, this work. So to the extent that you have any perspectives now about how we can make sure that we're really, to the best we can, assessing the needs of domestic well communities and states' small communities as part of this process, I would be interested to hear that. Otherwise, we would like to request a follow-up conversation, either at the next meeting or just sometime hopefully soon, to talk about the needs of domestic well and state small communities, both as part of the needs assessment process and as part of Drinking Water Fund implementation more generally. Third, we are very interested in leveraging all the work that's coming out of the Department of Water Resources, or DWR, around their drought and water shortage contingency process. A really phenomenal amount of work has been done by the DWR team. I know Michelle and others have been on the advisory committee for that effort. And we're interested in seeing, can the subcontractors for this needs assessment process leverage that data? Because we know that we need to be able to assess the water shortage risk as part of Drinking Water Fund implementation and understanding the needs of these communities. Lastly, we are very interested in exploring how all the hard work that's coming out of this needs assessment process, the data, the deliverables, can be leveraged to inform other important water policy efforts that are being undertaken right now. One that comes to mind is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act implementation, or SGMA. We know that we're going to have to, or at least we should, be trying to assess impacts to water quality and quantity for our most vulnerable communities as part of SGMA implementation. Well, the work that's being done in this needs assessment seems really valuable for being able to be utilized as part of the SGMA process, as well as undoubtedly others, and so would appreciate some conversation. So I know I just threw a lot at you. We're happy to meet and talk more, interested in hearing any more insights just right now. And then we do have a number of other comments, but we'll hold those till the afternoon session. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jonathan.
I'm
Michael Warburton from the Public Trust Alliance, and at risk of saying something outside the scope of the discussion, I think that the whole issue of what is the scope is very important. For a long time, it's been done exclusively, excluding things from the scope. And I am very heartened by this meeting because it seems to be oriented toward including. And that has been one of the values of the public trust doctrine. I don't know if people know that California Water is a public trust asset, and it has always been a public trust asset. For the last 20 years, water projects, some of them have been proposed, and implementers have thought that they would be implementing these projects in an environment where the public trust doctrine did not apply or was somehow gone. That did not turn out to be the case, and the relationship between federal and state funding is extremely important, just as tribal sovereignty is. California is sovereign, and it has responsibilities. And you know, when someone says the community wants to do this, but they're not the owners, they are the owners. They have always been the owners, and I hope that the State Water Resources Control Board is incorporating that notion, because it has always been a part of California water management.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I got everyone. Was there anyone else that had? Okay, great. So we're going to briefly break for lunch. Again, this is a working lunch. So the advisory group members, we have those of you who ordered lunch, we have it set up for you. However, before we do that, one more thing. We do want to get a group photo of the advisory members. So if you could follow Tara right here out front, she's going to take a quick photo. Audience members, if you would let the advisory group leave first so that they can get going. And then we will be back at 1:15, I believe. Yeah, for item number 4. Thank you.